Sports hasn't always been a way of bringing people together, and no matter where you are from, racism has reared its ugly head at least once. But many black players have endured the hatred and often criticism they undeservingly received to change the game of rugby into something we can all be proud of. From the likes of Chester Williams in South Africa to Thierry Dusautoir and more recently Maro Itoje, black rugby players have often risen through the ranks to become icons. Many of these players have paved the way for the next generations to come and will undoubtedly be remembered. But their stories are often overlooked. So today, we would like to look at some of these incredible icons and tell their stories that many might never hear. Make sure you stick around to the end, as this is not only a heartwarming video, but a true show of perseverance and the never say die attitude. Clive Sullivan. Now, Clive Sullivan might not be someone you know when you look at rugby union, but those who watch the Rugby League will have certainly heard of the former Great Britain Rugby League captain. Sullivan originally started his career in rugby union, with his start coming in his native country of Wales. However, it wasn't too long after that he was spotted by League scouts as a promising teenager. He eventually joined the army, where he continued his career in rugby union, but was later convinced to switch codes. Sullivan appeared in 3 Rugby League World Cups, winning 1 whilst being the captain of the Great Britain side. Now bear in mind that this was still a tense period for black people living in the British Empire. Sullivan continued his career for local club Hull KR, earning himself his name on a section of the city's main approach road. But let's go back even further. Jimmy Peters. If you haven't heard of Clive Sullivan, the name Jimmy Peters would be foreign to you. In fact, it is a name that very few people actually remember, but deserves a spot on this list. Peters became the first black person to ever play rugby union when he was selected to play for England in 1906. Being a circus troupe as a bareback horse rider, he had a rough job, which eventually led to him breaking his arm. He would abandon this job and move on to rugby, where he would continue playing the game for the next 2 years, even after losing 3 fingers in a dockyard accident. Peters earned himself the Man of the Year award for the 1907-08 season by the Plymouth Herald and continued to play the sport. He would later be banned from playing England after accepting a retirement gift from his club. Errol Tobias. Only die-hard South African rugby fans will remember the name Errol Tobias. In fact, Errol Tobias was thrust directly into the apartheid era, where he wasn't allowed to vote in his native country, yet he was playing local rugby and became such a standout player that France and Wales offered him opportunities to change his nationality. Tobias, even with the apartheid regime, always had hope and declined these opportunities in the hopes that he would be able to represent the Springboks. This day did come when he became the first black player to start a test match for the Springboks, but during his journey, he would also represent South Africa as a cricketer by playing for the Proteas. Years after retiring from the game, Tobias remained influential in the South African rugby sphere. He not only focused on coaching, but was often seen in the commentary booth, using his experience to analyse and dissect games. Today, Errol Tobias is a household name among rugby fans in South Africa, whilst being unknown to the rest of the world. Roy Francis. Perhaps the most notorious catalyst of black players in rugby is Roy Francis. He is becoming increasingly popular, with his career now even highlighted on BBC in the documentary The Rugby Codebreakers. Francis also started his career in rugby union, but later switched to rugby league, where he would score 229 tries in 356 league games. But this isn't where Roy Francis shined. In fact, it was his coaching that truly changed the way we see the game. He not only had a mind to understand other teams, but his psychological analysis was something that changed the game. Many can still argue, but during the coaching period of Roy Francis, he was the first coach to instate the defensive line and gave each player a specific defensive task of defending their channels. In fact, this technique of specialised defensive play is still used to this day and has changed the game of rugby as we know it. Lloyd McDermott. Now, the British Empire included countries like Australia and New Zealand in the early parts of the 20th century. While Australia had its fair share of players, the local Aboriginal players were hardly ever considered for the squad. This was until Lloyd McDermott was capped and played 2 test matches against the All Blacks. McDermott became an influential player in the Australian squad and often said he had to work twice as hard as his white peers. This paid off as he became the catalyst for Aborigines to break into the world of rugby. Lloyd McDermott changed the way these nations viewed their natives, and if it wasn't for his influence, we might not have had the opportunity to see the likes of Taniela Tupou and Marika Koroibete ever play for their national sides. But even though these legends paved the way, many modern rugby players simply took the brass ring and continued running with it. So for the next part of this video, we will look at a few of the modern code breakers of rugby. Jason Robinson. Perhaps one of the stars of the 21st century can be found in a man named Jason Robinson. Robinson represented England in the 2003 Rugby World Cup, but even though this is what arguably made his career, he has always been rated as one of the best wingers and fullbacks to ever play the game. Robinson played for numerous local clubs in England and finally got his call-up for international duty in 2001. He grabbed this with both hands, and in his 51 appearances for the Lions, he scored an impressive 28 tries, one of these being in the 2003 Rugby World Cup final, steering his nation to their first ever Webb Ellis Trophy. Robinson also made a few appearances for the British and Irish Lions, adding another 2 international tries to his tally before calling it quits in 2007. But with his experience in league rugby during his earlier years, he would later return to the game as a coach. But whilst Robinson was never vocal about his race, one cannot argue that he inspired many young black players around the world to get into the sport. Jonah Lomu. Whether Jonah Lomu should be on this list or not doesn't matter, as his influence in the game of rugby has earned him numerous spots on the lists of the greatest rugby icons of all time. Lomu represented the All Blacks, and during the early 90s, few native and black players ever made it into the team. Well, this was until Lomu showed that the Maori players have exceptional strength and speed. During a time when rugby was still amateurish, Lomu made it a profession and dedicated his life to being bigger and faster than any other player. His enormous size earned him numerous tries, and defences were stunned and left without an answer. In fact, Lomu was so influential that players realised they needed to dedicate more time to the game if they were to compete. Jonah Lomu would continue being influential even after his career came to a halt in 2010. He was often seen as an expert, and many people desired interviews with the big man. Lomu certainly deserves a spot on this list. Brian Habana. As more and more people started working out to become bigger, Brian Habana followed the way of Jason Robinson. Whilst numerous black players earned their spot in the Springbok side at the time, Habana truly shined with his skill and amazing footwork. Brian would guide the Springboks to their second Webb Ellis Trophy in 2007 and even equalled the record for the most tries set 12 years prior by Jonah Lomu. Habana became the first black South African player to land a big contract when he moved to Toulon and became an inspiring figure for the local youth. With plenty of accolades and numerous tries to back up his impressive resume, Habana is surely one of the players who broke out from the oppression and became not only a leader, but an influential figure in South African sports. Thierry Dusautoir. As we move back to the Northern Hemisphere, there is one name that constantly pops up when you think of influential black players. In the country of France, a young man named Thierry Dusautoir was setting the world alight with his performances local club Biarritz and later Toulouse. He would finally earn himself a spot in the French team in 2006. Thanks to his consistency, he was eventually named captain and was counted on to lead France in the 2001 Rugby World Cup. In fact, he was so inspirational as captain that France made it into the finals to meet the hosts, New Zealand. Even though the All Blacks snuck one over France to win the tournament, he became only the second black player behind Jason Robinson to score a try in a Rugby World Cup final. This earned him the coveted World Rugby Player of the Year award in the same year, and Dusautoir continued to shine by winning numerous titles with his local club. Even after he retired from rugby in 2017, he is still a pundit and often seen analysing games. Dusautoir showed that anyone can make it. Maro Itoje. Standing 6 feet and 5 inches tall and weighing a massive 254 pounds, Maro Itoje has often been in the conversation for the best player in the world. The man who was born in Camden has faced plenty of adversity in his tenure as a top player in the English squad, but has always risen to the occasion. In fact, he has accumulated an astonishing 76 caps for England, making him the highest capped black player in England's history. But Itoje doesn't care about records, and his brutal attitude when playing has struck fear into the hearts of many of his opponents. Itoje has captained England on a few occasions, and when we look at his accolades, you cannot argue his influence on the game. Maro Itoje has inspired plenty of players and showed that no matter the colour of your skin, you can build a successful rugby career. But we have left the best for last. Siya Kolisi. Is there anything more we can say about the South African captain and two-time Rugby World Cup winner? You see, Siya Kolisi came from extremely humble roots and often struggled throughout his younger and teenage years. Hailing from the rural areas of the Eastern Cape in South Africa, Kolisi never had it easy and finally got his opportunity after being offered a scholarship at Grey High School. Kolisi pounced on the opportunity and would make it his goal to become an excellent rugby player. This paid off when he went through the ranks and finally made his debut for the Springboks in 2013. Kolisi would continue to be in and out of the squad, and in 2017, Rassie Erasmus noticed something special about Kolisi. Kolisi was appointed Springbok captain against what many fans wanted, but Erasmus kept on believing, and this paid off. Kolisi led the Springboks to back-to-back Webb Ellis trophies and earned himself a lucrative contract at Racing Metro. However, he continues to advocate for black players and has never forgotten his roots. Siya is perhaps the most influential player, not only in South Africa, but probably in the world at the moment. But many of these players are never truly celebrated, and with this video, these stories can be heard. This proves that through hard work and dedication, anyone can make it to the top. So, who do you think is the most influential black player of all time?